Welcome, everybody. We're still admitting a couple people into the meeting. All right, welcome, everybody. This is the Chippewa Valley Rally. I guess we're calling it a political experts panel, and we're really here to take a look at what the political lay of the land is in Madison and how those of us who are going to be going to Madison as citizens talking about legislative issues, what kind of things we can be informed about and be as knowledgeable and appropriate in our comments when we meet with legislators as possible. Before we do that, I do want to mention that this is being done on Monday afternoon, February 20th. It is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to all registrants later on after we get it posted. And we also just made the decision today to postpone the rally, originally scheduled for this Wednesday, the 22nd, because of a weather forecast that shows up to 14 to 18 inches of snow, and a lot of that coming on the days we would be traveling to and from Madison. So right now we're working with a working date of March 29th for the rescheduling. We're still finalizing some details about that, so we'll be contacting you via email if you're registered about that. If you're registered and we go ahead with that, if the new date works for you, you don't need to do anything and you'll continue to be registered. If it doesn't and you need to cancel, let us know, and we will be opening registration for anyone who can attend on the new date but wasn't available to attend this week. And I will mention that if you had hotel reservations at the Park Hotel, they did waive any cancellation penalties, and in fact went ahead and canceled the rooms in our room block, and we will be sending out new information about rooms. So let's get into our topic for today. And I will remind you to keep your camera off and your mic off. Unless you're one of our speakers, which you'll be meeting in just a minute. If you do have questions, we would welcome those, and use the chat function on your Zoom screen, and we'll watch for those and try to ask them as we go along. I don't think I introduced myself, so I'll let you know that my name is Scott Rogers. I'm Vice President Governmental Affairs at the Eau Claire Chamber of Commerce. The Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls, and Menominee chambers are working together to put on the 29th annual Chippewa Valley Rally in Madison, where we take a list of issues that are important to the community and to business in our area, primarily related to economics, and bring them to lawmakers in Madison and cabinet officials and others so that we can let them know what's important to our area, and hopefully have a positive influence on how we're treated by state government in this area. So I want to welcome everybody. We appreciate your being here. And I wanted to introduce our two guests, and then we'll kind of get into a discussion with them. We have Bill McCoshen with us. Bill is a partner with Michael Best Strategies. He has a combined many decades of experience in the Wisconsin Governor's Office, as a cabinet secretary, as a successful lobbyist. He previously served as managing partner of Madison-based Capital Consultants for about 23 years. He's from Superior originally. He had key positions in Tommy Thompson administration, including Secretary of Commerce and Chief of Staff, and also managed one of Governor Thompson's campaigns. Bill, you want to say hello?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me back. I enjoy this immensely, and I enjoyed doing this panel with Sean, who's got deep experience and connections to Eau Claire as well.
Yes, and speaking of Sean, Sean Paff is president of Paff Public Affairs. They're a lobbying and media relations firm. He works closely with a number of organizations, primarily in the area of agriculture. He also formerly worked at Capital Consultants with Bill. He was there for 7 years. He also spent 3.5 years as an advisor in Governor Jim Doyle's office, and was the deputy campaign manager in the governor's 2006 reelection. He also served 3 years in Washington, D.C. as a congressional aide, and he grew up on a dairy farm in La Crosse County. Sean, you want to say hi?
Yes, thank you, Scott. And one of the things in my biography was I'm a 1994 graduate of University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. and as we like to refer to it, harbored on the Chippewa. So I'm
Right.
honored to be here again. I'm honored to be here again this year. So
That's good.
All right. Well, we appreciate both of you being here.
This
and,
meeting is being recorded.
all right. I guess Zoom told us it's being recorded. I think we already knew that, but let's talk about the lay of the land a little bit in Madison. Sean, maybe we should start with you. Your background is working with the Democratic side of the aisle, and we have a governor who was just reelected, but continues to have, in fact, the Republicans increase their majority in both houses of the legislature in the last election. So how are Democrats viewing the lay of the land in Madison these days? How are you looking at it? And what kind of strategy are we seeing from the governor's office and the other members of his party?
well, it is interesting, Scott, you say that. I mean, Governor Tony Evers cruised to reelection, which was a surprise to many, as many thought that he was in deep trouble. And Governor Evers saw his numbers increase in urban areas like the city of Eau Claire and the county of Eau Claire, but saw his numbers drop in the rural parts of the state. So that is also the backdrop of what we see in the state capitol. Not only do you have a Republican Democratic divide, if you will, you also have an urban and rural divide. I think Democrats were pleasantly surprised. I stress surprised by Evers' margin of victory. I think that they feel confident that last fall the abortion issue.
Chris Curry, Vice Chancellor Finance. I have to get this in that by after tomorrow, but Chris Curry will provide an update
Abortion
on
issue is.
what's the sentence or two
We need
for the
to put
budget.
something Mike, Scott, if that's okay. The abortion issue was huge for Democrats. So anyway, moving forward, you saw the state go through a massive spending in the governor's campaign. I think now Democrats see an opportunity here, $7.1 billion surplus, a governor who seems to have his feet firmly underneath him with a reelection campaign, and a second term where he can really put his impact on the state. I think the governor has confidence that his messaging is working across the state, but as Bill will explain, the state capitol is dominated by Republicans still. Democrats did lose seats. They lost long-time held Democratic seats up in Bill's neck of the woods, Superior and Ashland, and seats they'd held forever. So with that backdrop, I think we're in a place here where maybe there will be a breakthrough of bipartisanship after many years of kind of conflict back and forth. So I think the Democrats feel optimistic, but they also sense that they need to firmly support Governor Evers and his budget.
So Bill, what do you see as the lay of the land with someone who has more of a background in the Republican side of things? What's going on in Madison these days?
I would say Republicans feel pretty emboldened by the election results as well. They picked up 3 seats in the state assembly. They temporarily had a supermajority in the state Senate until Alberta Darling announced her early retirement. So now we have a special election in the 8th Senate district, which is essentially the northern part of Milwaukee. That will be on the same day as the Supreme Court race. So I would say both sides got stronger. Sean's right. The governor won by 3 points rather than 1. He won by 90,000 votes rather than 27,000 votes. So both sides got stronger. The question is, can we find some grand bargains on some issues? And I think over the course of the next 55 minutes, we're going to identify some areas where I think there can be agreements between the Democratic governor and the Republican legislature. They can find areas to not only compromise, but do it without giving away their core philosophy. And it's just a question of whether or not they want to get it done. And I think most people in Madison are hopeful that there will be some agreements this time around. You may recall in the past 2 budgets, Republicans have sent those directly to the governor without any input from the governor. He ended up signing both of them. The first one he signed with no Democratic support for it, and he ended up having about 200 partial vetoes. The second one actually was bipartisan, and folks like Sean's brother did vote for it. So, I think the ideal situation, having worked for a governor who also had to face the opposition party majorities, is to find those areas where we can find common ground that actually benefit everybody.
Scott, I would just jump in. Bill and I also have a unique perspective that I don't know if he and I have ever talked about. We've shared a lot of political stories, but Bill was there with a strong governor, Governor Thompson, when the economy was booming and there was surpluses. And I was there when Doyle came in after September 11th and then was bookended by the 2008 recession. So these are different times when you see a $7.1 billion surplus and then you have split government here. It's been a long time since we've been in this position here. And your members, when they get down here in a few weeks, we'll see how many times that surplus has been spent already by different groups. But it's a crazy dynamic right now where you have both sides that feel empowered, but both sides that realize there's a surplus there. And I think there's also a sense that both sides realize they can do some legacy building things here. The last piece is what Bill said, will they get to a place where they could possibly find a grand compromise on some big stuff?
You both mentioned possibly getting to compromises and the fact that we actually got budgets done on time in the last two cycles with split government. But that happened really without any direct, if I understand it right, tell me if I'm wrong, really any direct negotiations between the governor and the legislature.
That's right.
What would be the signs we would see that there's going to be more cooperation this time around?
Well, you won't see it. So what has to happen, Scott and folks from Eau Claire Chamber, is there has to be trust built between the legislative leadership and the governor's office. And that goes beyond just the governor. That includes his chief of staff or any other staff member he may have involved in these discussions. That trust was broken early in the Evers administration. Some of those players are still there. I'm not trying to personalize this, but at the end of the day, in order to get big things done in politics in Madison, there has to be a level of trust between the parties who are at the table. And there's some work to be done in that area. So you won't necessarily see it. It hopefully will be building over the next 90 to 100 days in Madison. And that involves having regular conversations, talking about some of the bigger issues, figuring out sort of where some of the guardrails are on each side, both the right and the left. And then, sometimes through intermediaries, staffers, high-level staffers, possible negotiating positions going back and forth. Those things don't happen on the front page of the Eau Claire Leader Telegram or the Wisconsin State Journal or the Journal Sentinel. But it starts with trust, and that's an area where they're going to have to do quite a bit of work over the next 90 to 100 days. But again, I think it's an area where they can find common ground.
So right now you see a little bit of posturing. Obviously, the governor's got a head start on this because it starts with him. He spent the last few weeks rolling out big pieces of his budget, the investment in education, the taxes. But both sides are talking about tax cuts. Now, how you get there is different. The governor wants to do more of a middle class, as he calls it, tax cut, under 150,000 if a joint filer, 100,000 or under if you're a single filer. Don't touch the higher threshold of the tax code, kind of keeping Wisconsin's small p progressive tax code. Evers wants to put 1.2 billion in tax cuts in. And someone who, Democrats sometimes get blamed for not wanting to be tax cutters. You can argue that Evers is tax cutter Tony. He did it, whether he did it the Republican budget or not. Evers have signed tax cuts in both budgets he signed and looking forward to signing another budget. The other big piece of this is education. I mean, Evers, there's no doubt with his background of DPI and knowing all the school districts around the state, he wants to put $2 billion with a B, not to sound like Austin Powers, but with a B. That's big money. And that's a lot. And Republicans, I'm sure, want to put more in education, but will that increase in education funding? What happens? School choice expansion, school vouchers, charter school expansion. Those are some of the really big issues that I think you can get there on. But like Bill said, it'll take some time. There'll be some back and forth here. But just get the sense that the state isn't really looking for a fight. I think the state's voters made their choices and they're kind of comfortable where things are at with split government.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm going to, Scott, pick up on 2 points that Sean made. The two biggest areas where I think they can find compromise are taxes and education. Let's take them in order. Taxes, I think it's actually really helpful strategically for the governor to say he'll veto a flat tax. Now, as a former Commerce Secretary, I can tell you that would actually be very helpful to the state from an economic development and recruiting standpoint, but set aside my own view on that. he's staying where his guardrail is right out of the chute. And honestly, from a negotiating standpoint, that's helpful. So can they find an agreement on taxes? I can guarantee you the tax plan that passes the Republican legislature will be substantially bigger than the 1.2 billion that the governor recommended last Tuesday night. It may be double that. It could even be triple that. That's a Republican's highest priority, is making sure that as much of that surplus goes back to the people who paid it as possible. So, but I think there is an area on taxes, which is good for the state of Wisconsin. Secondly, on education, I don't think that the governor's $2.6 billion recommendation for K-12 schools will pass. But I think there could be a pretty significant increase in K-12 education, provided there's also an increase in payments for charter and choice schools. You may not know this, but statewide per pupil aid, combination of state and local, is roughly $14,000. For charter and choice schools, it's significantly less than that. It's between $8,000 and $9,000. I think you'll see some Republicans push for some parity between those funding mechanisms. Frankly, that's more important for the school choice movement than universal school choice, because not many of these seats, what we call them seats, would be opened up, because small schools can't afford to do this without higher reimbursement. So I think you're going to try and see some equity on the Republican side as it relates to funding of kids in the K-12 system, regardless of what their parents choose. If they choose the local K-12 school, if they open and roll from Eau Claire North to Eau Claire Memorial, or if they go with a charter or a choice option. So I think you'll see Republicans push for equity. And if they can get that, I don't think that they may seek universal choice in order to get here, but the funding equity would go a long way towards the governor getting a good share of what he wants as it relates to the traditional public schools in Wisconsin.
We've seen these big issues like legalized marijuana. You know, we all have positions on that. Evers has come out third time asking for that. We've seen issues of taking the federal Medicaid dollars that Governor Walker decided not to do and the Democrats want. Evers put those in his budget, wants those to talk about statewide, but I'm sure is realistic that those are going to be kicked out of the budget. So these big issues, policy items, stuff like that, get tossed to the side. But I think you're going to get to the meat and potatoes of tax cuts, education funding, and funding for local governments. I think, yes, they're massive issues, but I think there is definitely room where folks are starting to kind of realize that's where this thing is going to head. We focus on those kind of things. Those big issues will be out there. There's no doubt. One thing I will add, Scott, is there's also the backdrop. Bill can jump in here. The backdrop of the April 4th election. Tomorrow, many of you hope you've already voted, but you're voting to state Supreme Court race, as Bill had said. You clear the field. April 4th will be a massive state Supreme Court race of who controls the Supreme Court. Will liberals take the court back? Will conservatives hold it? The reason I say that also has a backdrop and how this session goes. That kind of determines what happens over the next 6 weeks. Besides the Fiscal Bureau going through the budget, there's this election known as who controls the Supreme Court. Abortion is a backdrop issue on that. Those are things that the state capitol's kind of waiting to see the other shoe drop on something like this upcoming election.
Maybe before go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Sean raises a phenomenal point. For those of you that haven't voted, I hope you do tomorrow, and definitely on April 4th. That race is huge as it relates to the negotiations between the administration and the Republican majorities. Both sides will be watching it. I don't think you'll see much from either side between now and April 4th, other than what the governor's already proposed as his budget. I think everyone will sort of wait to see how that shakes out. If the court flips to a progressive majority or liberal majority, whichever term you prefer, Republicans may be less willing to negotiate with the governor on big deals, and they may send him smaller or thinner bills. Any bill that's got an appropriation in it is subject to the partial veto. So one option for the Republicans is to send him one bill with the money in it and the other bill with the policy in it. And I wouldn't rule that out at this point in time. But Sean is 100% right that Supreme Court race is sort of the undercurrent in Madison for everything right now.
I was going to ask you just one more question about taxes, and maybe we'll get back into it. But it's also been mentioned, and one of you at least mentioned the local governments wanting ways to get more revenue. And I think the governor proposed having a portion of the state sales tax actually go to local governments. What are the prospects for some of those kinds of deals as we go forward?
I think that's the one that's the closest to getting done. I do. The cities, counties, towns, villages have been negotiating with Republicans all fall, not knowing what was going to happen in the gubernatorial race. I think the governor got wind of one of the options, which is, dedicating essentially 21 cent of this 5 cent sales tax to local governments. He announced that last Tuesday night. That is a GOP idea from the fall. So I think that's the one area where we're the closest to having one of those grand bargains. I think Republicans in Madison and throughout the state understand that the relationship between state government and local government has to change in large measure because of the revenue limits, and local governments need a way to fund their services.
And this is one of those things, Scott. Now, I think the Hope the group is impressed with my Chippewa Valley geography knowledge. That the town of Eagle Point is going to lobby in Chippewa County, is going to be lobbying for more money for local governments, just like the city of Milwaukee. There isn't going to be this Milwaukee versus the rest of them. Sure, there'll be some conversations about that, but this is across the board. And this isn't intended to be a political statement, but I think that folks in the Capitol realize that 12 years of local governments kind of going through what they've gone through, it's time to invest. Evers, say what you want about Tony. He's not the most exciting guy. I hope he doesn't hear that, but during the campaign, he campaigned on shared revenue. Geez, as a guy that got his master's degree in municipal government, I certainly love shared revenue, but I can't imagine voters were too excited. But you'd be surprised. Bill and I are in that Capitol every day. People are talking about this package. This is a big deal. And you got town leaders from local governments in Western Wisconsin. And you got the two dynamic leaders in Milwaukee, Cavalier Johnson, the new mayor, and David Crowley, the county executive, walking with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Association of Commerce, the business community, saying, let's invest. And I think that is a big deal. I think that is going to be some back to Bill's old boss that did the what they called the Kettle Commission back in the day, where the last time local governments were really all on the same page, no matter what size of government they are. I think that'll be something that is a legacy building part of this budget, just like a big tax, permanent tax relief, as well as investing in schools, but to legacy build, to fund local governments, maybe look at that mechanism of how you do that. It's long overdue, and I think this could really happen. And your group coming down here, I think, has that as part of their issue set. And those local leaders up there know this stuff and know how important, especially with 14 inches of snow or more on its way.
So one thing we might step back and do kind of quickly, because we have a wide range of experience of people who are listening to us today, and some of them I recognize as having a lot of experience and knowledge of local and state government. Others who are citizens who want to get involved and do the right thing, and so they've heard about the Supreme Court race maybe impacting how the budget comes out, and about a partial veto and that sort of thing. So maybe just kind of a quick recap of what is going to happen between now with the governor submitting a proposed budget. What's going to happen between now and hopefully July when the new fiscal year starts? What are the things that are going to happen, and things that are the dynamics that are going to affect how it turns out?
Well, go ahead, Sean.
Sure, as we enter the Lenten season here, there's 40 days of that, and there'll probably be 45 days of the state's fiscal bureau looking at the budget, going through it and really kind of gleaning it out. What does it mean? Kind of put it in USA Today language. So that's going to happen over the next 45 days or so, Scott. So that's going to allow governor will travel around the state, talk about his priorities. Republicans will do the kind of what they do, rightfully so, always do, wait to see what happens. That is the moment where constituents really got to weigh in. And you run a great shop up there, Scott, and this Chippewa Valley rally. The timing, whether it's postponed a little bit because of weather, still fits in that 45-day time frame where people are kind of absorbing and finding out what is in this budget. Bill can get into the Joint Finance Committee and what they do, but they're going to travel around the state. But I think from a governor's perspective, as someone who worked in the governor's office in a split government when John Gard was the Speaker of the Assembly, Doyle traveled around the state and really sold his message. Now, he didn't have a $7.1 billion surplus. He had a $3.6 billion deficit. It was a different ball game. We had to cut the university funding and things like that. Evers gets a chance to really go around and make investments. And the community, it's time for the countryside and the city to weigh in what they want to do. And I guess that time frame is March and April. And then I'll let Bill kind of talk about what's going to happen in the capital and finance and the budget and things like that.
Well, had we had you guys in Madison this week, the governor was going to be our guest speaker, and hopefully he would have announced tomorrow that funding for Science Hall 2.0 is going to be in his capital budget. The governor's capital budget gets released on Wednesday. We don't have an answer yet, so I'm just cautiously optimistic. But the capital budget will add to this too. So a couple things timing wise, very little will happen for the next 6 weeks. The finance committee will be analyzing every detail of the governor's regular budget, where the taxes and the education and transportation are, and his capital budget. The finance committee will announce a roadshow. I believe one of the hearings is actually going to be in Eau Claire. I know they've been working with campus on that and with the chamber. That'll happen in April, and late April is generally when the Joint Committee on Finance begins voting on the budget. When we would get to the point where deals could be had, that's truthfully in May. That's when the governor's office, either they've set the table the right way or not, and the Republicans have gone along for the ride or not, and you'll know, by May timeframe whether or not there's going to be some white smoke, as Catholics would say, as it relates to some big issues, taxes, spending, education, local aid, transportation. But think about big themes. 3 things you're going to hear from Republicans for the next 90 days for sure is how much the governor's budget spends. It's 24%, roughly 23.5% more than the current biennial budget. It's a record. You're going to hear that from them, how much it spends, how much it taxes. There are tax increases in there as well as tax reductions. There won't be any tax increases in the final budget, I can promise you that. And then how much it puts on the credit card. I fully suspect the governor will have a robust capital budget on Wednesday of this week. Republicans are not likely to go along with that. That hasn't been their history, particularly Senate Republicans. Remember, just because Republicans control both houses doesn't mean they necessarily agree between the Senate and the Assembly on what final agreement should look like. So they're going to have to come together before they can even have an agreement with the governor. And on a few of those issues, they got some work to do.
Scott, and the other thing is to just kind of add on to what Bill said. This is also an opportunity with that surplus where you have one-time funding. So let's have a philosophical conversation. I'll admit I'm a total Milwaukee Brewer meathead. If they win the World Series, I don't know what I would do, Scott, if they ever win the World Series. But are the Brewers worth putting $300 million in? That's a great question, especially you guys coming from West Central Wisconsin. Those are the kind of one-time funding deals that we're going to see both sides work through. Now, the governor rightfully, I guess he surprised the Republicans on that by not letting them know about the Brewers Stadium stuff. But those regional big issues like that'll matter. Our science building in Eau Claire, the Stout project as well. Very important projects for our part of the state that Bill and I are honored to represent down here. But do they matter in Kewaskum or Marinette? So this one-time funding stuff, how does that work? Can you have the money to let's pay for some stuff in cash? UW-Madison wants some big buildings as well. The other big picture thing I'll say about the budget, Scott, in terms of posturing, and I'm not making any news here, so don't think it. If, for example, the governor were to say he was going to veto it, Bill said he sent a huge signal by saying he would veto a flat tax, more or less, if it was in the budget. If he were to do something like that, he'd have to signal his hand pretty early, because if you're going to veto an entire budget, you got to get all the Democratic operation up and running, ready to protect his veto, all that kind of stuff. I don't see that happening in this budget, but for something like that to happen, that has to be laid out weeks in advance. And, we would see if that's going to happen probably by the middle to late May for sure.
Yeah, and since Sean brought up the Brewers, I'm not 100% sure that's going to be in the budget. And let's walk through the politics of that. If it's in the budget, arguably, Republicans are going to pass their own budget, right? They have the majority. That's their job is to govern, so they'll have to pass a budget. So, but are there Republicans from northern Wisconsin or even western Wisconsin who would want to vote on the Brewers package? The answer is probably no, believe it or not. And Democrats, how many Democrats are actually going to vote for the budget, and how many reside in Southeast Wisconsin? The answer is quite a few. So if it's a separate bill, those Democrats are either going to have to step up or let the thing fail. And it lets certain Republicans from rural areas off the hook, so they don't have to vote for the Brewers. I, for one, think having a Major League Baseball team in the state of Wisconsin is good for the state of Wisconsin from an economic development standpoint, from an image standpoint. I think it's, we've proven that was smart, but don't forget the politics of the current AmFam field. Miller Park was passed by Republican majorities. Within 12 months, George Petak, the final vote on that was recalled, and Democrats retook the majority in the state Senate, and then the majority flipped back and forth about 4 times in the next 8 years. Sean remembers that well. Republicans do too. So I don't know that they're going to walk the plank on the Brewers thing all by themselves. Do not be surprised if that gets dealt with separately. However, I would say the governor was smart to use one-time money for that and not some new taxing instrument. I do think that piece could be part of the final package.
Let's shift gears just a little bit and then go back to some of the issues. One of the things we wanted to talk about is we're bringing in a bunch of people to Madison who don't do this every day. They're not people, some of them probably follow things, they read the news. Some of them don't do that quite as in quite as much detail. And they're going to be visiting 5 legislative offices and taking a set of issues, which is actually a little bit longer than usual this year because of it being a budget year and how much is important, into those offices for a short meeting. Why are these kinds of meetings, or are they important in terms of influencing what the legislature will do? And how can a person who's a delegate on the Chippewa Valley Rally, maybe even for the first time, how should they conduct themselves? What can they do to make those visits as effective as possible?
Sure. I would say that, first of all, you guys can show up with confidence. You're coming from a great part of the state. Economic diversity, collaborative. Yes, there's Republicans and Democrats, but that is truly one part of the state where people work together on big stuff, almost post-partisan on big stuff. Confidence of strong public institutions like UW Eau Claire, UW Stout, Chippewa Valley Tech College. So you come with a good message and a good place to come. 2, you're real. I love Bill. Bill loves me, but we're lobbyists, and I like to say that lobbyists are like Cher and cockroaches. We can survive nuclear war. We about have the same respect sometimes as both. But anyway, you guys are real people that have a story to tell. And that is so crucial because that is a part of the state where you're working together. Collaboration still matters in a polarized world that we see in Washington, D.C. every day. Collaboration works together. So the town government person from Dunn County, who's in the same group as the business leader from downtown Eau Claire, don't care what the municipal lines are, don't care what the demographics of client bases are. It is that we are working for the betterment of the region of the state, and we have a good product to sell. That matters. And I think just from a human relations standpoint, you guys have run meetings every day. You communicate, tell your story, but also listen. Lawmakers want to talk, and they also are very proud of their part of the state. So hear from them. And Scott, I hope you save me one of those fancy scarves too, because everybody knows when you guys are in the Capitol because you guys got the scarves. But I think it's good that your employers let you take the day off, or hopefully it's part of your day, and get down here and speak with confidence and speak with the ability to know that collaboration still matters.
Yeah, I think Sean's dead on as it relates to that. The other thing I would say is the Chippewa region is focused, right? You're not coming down asking for 15 things. Some regions make that mistake. You've spent a lot of time developing your plan. Most lawmakers already know what your plan is because you made it abundantly clear during the last election cycle, which was smart on your part. So these are not new issues. You're coming down as the voice of the Chippewa Valley. You're not a paid lobbyist. You're somebody who lives in that area, and you can explain from your vantage point why these things are important in the Chippewa Valley, and that matters. The last thing I will say is, regardless of whether you get the lawmaker themselves or their chief of staff or their lowest level staffer, make sure you make a connection there. That lowest level staffer one day will be the chief of staff, may one day be a lawmaker like an Ellen Shute from Clinton, was Amy Loudenbeck's chief of staff last session, and now she's in the legislature herself. So the relationship you make, don't dismiss them because they're a kid. I see Michelle Farrow on. She and I were kids when we started in the Capitol. So was Sean, and we turned out to be something okay later on in life. So regardless of who you are speaking with, treat them with respect, treat them with dignity, and assume they can be your ally if they feel good about what they heard from you. So lastly, don't overthink it. These folks are generalists. They all have backgrounds in something very specific, yet they're asked to make judgments on thousands of issues through the course of a session. They can't possibly become experts on all of it. So, just be yourself would be my final advice.
So I actually do have kind of related to what we're talking about, and then maybe we'll get into some of the specific issues too. And that is looking at the makeup of the legislature. We just had an election. So even though we talk about the Republicans increasing their numbers, we also had some turnover, right? How much of the legislature is new? And what is the sort of general thoughts that other parts of the state's legislators have about the Chippewa Valley? I guess that was what was asked.
It's third largest turnover in state history, and they were all retirements. I think only one incumbent was beaten, and the reason he was beaten is his district changed so much. That was Don Bruwink. His district that he ran in this time didn't look anything like the one that he's had for the last decade. So only one incumbent lost. Everyone else decided to retire or move on. It's the largest turnover, third largest turnover in state history. The legislature is generally younger. It's a little more ideological on both sides. So know that going in. But you view it as an opportunity. These 25% don't know a lot about Eau Claire, right? Or the Chippewa Valley, and they don't know necessarily what's important to you. And you may not have hit them during the campaign cycle because they had no reason to be up in your media market. So if you get somebody from Southeast Wisconsin or South Central Wisconsin or even Northern Wisconsin, make sure they understand who you are, why you're there on behalf of the Chippewa Valley Rally, and what's important to you. View it as an education opportunity. You can't get to persuasion unless they have a baseline of education.
I'll give you two examples quickly. This helps. I know Jake Rossi's on here from UW Eau Claire. Representative Whitkey from Racine was on the Racine School Board, very close with the Speaker Voss, who was also from Racine County. His kid went to UW Eau Claire. So point of the matter is there's connections there. Bill and I have a good friend named Pat Schillinger, who's done well in his life, works for We Energies, was a Blue Gold, worked for Bill with Governor Thompson. Schillinger was very close with former Joint Finance Chair John Nygren and was very helpful on Pablo Center and the Confluence when we needed help. People know of Eau Claire. They've driven through it if they've gone to Minneapolis, but they also, I think, sense the same thing that you guys have seen. And I talked to my college buddies fondly about 30 years ago in Eau Claire. Oh, you got to go back to the Pioneer. Oh, you can't believe it. I said, you guys, Eau Claire's awesome, and it's changed so much because of the energy downtown. Well, nobody went downtown when we were there. Totally changed. Eau Claire, Chippewa Valley is booming, close to the cities. So people are starting to realize there's energy up there. There's youth, there's roads, there's infrastructure, there's diversity of economies. So there's that energy, that synergy that's happening. And they also know that it's not snagged up with heavy partisan politics at the local level or something like that. It just feels like it's a good vibe up there. So two parts. One, you'd be surprised how many Blue Golds are in the Capitol. Scott's former intern is a top aide for the Joint Finance Chair. Sorry, Scott, didn't mean to blow your secret there, but hopefully you still talk to him. I know you do. And two, know that people sense that the Chippewa Valley is heading in the right direction. There's positive energy up there. And that's all the way from west of Menominee to east of Eau Claire, north of Chippewa and south of Osseo. There is energy in that part of the state, and people are starting to feel that.
So one other thing kind of related to that, when we hear about legislative leadership, of course, Robin Voss or Devin Lemahue are the ones you hear the most, and they're from other parts of the state. We also hear about the Joint Finance Committee being very powerful. Where does our region stand in terms of having influence in leadership or the Joint Finance Committee?
Sure, Bill, if you don't mind, I'll take a crack at that one first, and you can help me because you know him better than I do. Don't forget Representative Summerfield, who's a great guy, is very close to Speaker, and I'll let Bill speak about that more because he knows him better than I do. I'll just speak from Democratic side of the aisle. Jody Emerson and Jeff Smith, both reelected, both have great relationships with the governor. Both know how important the priorities are on the list that you guys are bringing down. So I think the Chippewa Valley, it also demonstrates that, yes, there's partisan politics. There's no doubt that folks are going to be on a different side of an issue when it comes to reproductive freedoms or bail amendments or whatever kind of things there are. But big picture, there's still that ability to kind of put down that partisan sword and look at a regional standpoint. And I think that is really stands out in the region, that you can do that. And as a region, it stands out in the capital, that's possible. And I think that those relationships are there. Yes, there's no doubt there's more Republicans that serve in the legislature from the Chippewa Valley than Democrats, but Evers' numbers in the city of Eau Claire and immediate area were very strong and got better. The governor feels like he's on good footing up in that part of the state. And of course, the Republicans have a lot of reach in that part of the state. So I think that even though maybe you don't see them in high profile committees, there are no doubt that there's lawmakers from Chippewa Valley that have the ears of leaders in their caucuses.
Yeah, I would agree with Sean that Rob Summerfield is a sleeper, right? He is in assembly leadership. He may not be on the finance committee, but he's the speaker is a fan of his, and Rob's got his ear, and he's got an ability to get things done. We don't have a Kathy Bernier this time around, who sits on the Joint Committee on Finance. She was obviously a massive ally for not only Eau Claire, but UW Eau Claire. And her retiring is a bit of a setback, but Jesse James, I think, is going to be an influential senator, and probably the one you wouldn't predict that can help the Eau Claire and Chippewa Valley is Romaine Quinn. Remember, UW Eau Claire Barron County is in his district, and I think Romaine will step up and help the campus, at least as it relates to Science Hall 2.0. And the chancellor, to his credit, has been working Romaine well before that campaign was even underway, with the possibility that could happen. So I think the campus has done what needed to be done to sort of lay the groundwork with all the right folks. But you got people like Warren Petrick, Trig Pronginski, there are others, and Shannon Zimmerman's just down the road, who also have an ability to make a difference. And I think to one of Sean's earlier points, which shouldn't be dismissed, is this region hangs together, right? Unlike most regions in the state, this region hangs together and sort of separates the politics, or the partisanship, I should say, to do what's in the interest of the area. And that's much more unique than you might think. And it's helpful in Madison for sure.
I will just add, Scott, the key though, and I give you credit and your colleagues in Chippewa Falls, I see my friend Kathy from Chippewa's on, in Menominee, your issue sets are collaborative and they're organized and they're early. And so we know what you guys are talking about. So it's all on the same playbook, and you got your stuff together by the 15th of February or 20th of February, whatever date it is now. That is fantastic, because that gives you the ability to know your issues, stay on script, and really allow your people down there to have a clear message to all of a sudden, yeah, we know about that building in Menominee and Eau Claire. Yep, we know, that kind of stuff. That's always a good place to be when it comes June and July, or especially late May and June, when Bill and I are knocking on those Capitol doors saying, hey, remember our issue set here. You guys go put the finishing touches on the budget.
And maybe to clarify too, both of you mentioned Rob Summerfield, and he has a leadership position. What is that?
Deputy caucus director.
Okay. All right.
So he's doing a lot of the, I don't want to disrespect the position because it's very important, but he is checking in with members on caucus issues and reporting to the speakers, kind of how a caucus for
At the
support.
federal level, it would be called a whip.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
All right.
He's got a temperature check of where the caucus is at, which is good because, like, and I think the other thing that Eau Claire and Chippewa add, you kind of have a sense of, consensus a little bit. It isn't quite super right and super left, kind of Western Wisconsin. We all kind of figure it out over in our part of the state. I mean, I'm from there, not anymore, but you get my point.
So when we had our issues briefing last week, one of the things we sort of talked about was sometimes we have very specific things we're asking for. And then a lot of our issues, if you look at them, we're stating a challenge that our communities have, and we want state government to work on these and to solve them. And so, for instance, when we get into housing and childcare, we have some ideas as to what needs to be done, but we don't say, and maybe we're too early for it, we don't say pass this particular bill. But in the current set of issues, we're celebrating one issue that was very specific that we took each of the last 2 years, and that is the Department of Administration carrying through and selling some excess land in Chippewa Falls. And that actually gets to the idea that not every issue we bring is a legislative issue, that sometimes we bring an issue to state government in a cabinet department and it can help move things forward. So that's one maybe to comment on doing that, but particularly the two we have this year are the two UW capital projects. And I know we've already talked about the Heritage Hall renovation and the Science and Health Sciences building, but what is the sort of status of those in terms of being able to get them into the capital budget, the outlook for it, and how we can really help make that happen?
Well, I think the Eau Claire project, I think that one of the things that's really focused on, good about that area is the area is focused on it. Whether it be the chamber, to have the Chamber of Commerce work in hand, hand in hand, if you will, with the UW and its allies, Eau Claire, to get something like that done is huge. The other piece of that, which demonstrates truly the beauty of the collaboration in the Chippewa Valley, is having Mayo as a well-known, well-branded, well-respected partner, part of that. Last piece of that Eau Claire project is that this has reach. Bill mentioned Romaine Quinn. Romaine is from Rice Lake. Yes, Barron County is from Rice Lake, but to have people view a building in Eau Claire that could help the economy and not get parochial and say, well, if it's only good for Eau Claire, how does it help us here in Elk Mound, or how does it help us here in Bloomer? You don't seem to have that up in this part of the state. The other thing with the Stout project, I don't know as much about that as others on this call, Scott, but I will say they have worked with UW System. It is a priority for UW System. That matters with Evers. That matters that it's on the systems list. The Eau Claire project is as well, but the Stout project is well regarded on the systems list. Stout is a very proud university as well, and you have strong lawmakers down in that area. And that from that area of the state that can really be helpful on this. So these two projects have gone through the traps. I've learned a lot about lobbying in my life, but to lobby DOA and the building commission, and oh my heavens, just you could write 16 books on that. But we are at that point because strong third-party validators, strong ability to show that graduates are getting jobs, that matters. And Bill he knows this stuff better than I do because he's more of a business background, but the metrics that lawmakers look for when they make these big investments. Lastly, with a $7.1 billion deficit, these big projects, university funding, I know matters to Evers, and we anticipate his announcement, hopefully, of these projects on Wednesday.
Yeah, you actually provided me an opportunity to remind your delegation of something fairly important, Scott, and that's the UW. Let's say I'm right. The UW, the governor includes all of the 19 projects on the UW capital budget recommendation. Let's say he includes all of them. There is a numbering system that goes with that. I think it's really important for everybody on this call to understand. I know Jake and Grace from the UW Eau Claire are on here. The chancellor never leapfrogs his project over some other project in the system. He talks about the merits of the Science and Health Sciences building all by itself, and he sells that project. He never says it's better than the top 10 projects or this project or that project. He never even discusses the other projects on the list. I think that's really important because you don't want to pit the campus against another campus over funding. The project stands on its own. Heritage Hall probably, like Sean, I don't know enough about that, but that probably stands on its own as well. But the one caution I would give you is never talk about rankings of projects or why Eau Claire should be higher than it is or whatever. None of that matters to lawmakers. As long as it's in the governor's capital budget, that's all we need from him at this point in time. If it's not in the governor's budget, we have had the ability to get things in the budget later in the process. Gets a lot more complicated as it relates to UW's system. So ideally, the governor's announcing tomorrow or Wednesday at the very latest that the Science Hall building is going to be in that. It's a big number. It's $230 million roughly. A lot of that has to do with inflation, but it stands out by its size. But the transformational nature of the project is what really stands out, and the partnership with Mayo and what it could mean for the entire region, and that includes Rice Lake. If Marshfield Clinic and Essentia do merge, there's a pretty big Marshfield Clinic hospital right there in Rice Lake, right? However that looks, if the Barron County campus did more in the nursing sector, that all sort of works together. And the chancellor's visionary enough to understand all of that. So this is a transformational project for the region. And that's how it's packaged. But I want to be very clear, we never pit this project against another one on the system list.
So among the reasons that these UW projects are advocated for by the full community and the business community, clearly they're good for those universities, but also the broader impact on workforce and our strengthening our economy. And workforce really is an element of every issue on our agenda this year. And we've maybe given a little bit of short shrift to the other ones, but they include talent attraction, they include housing, supply and affordability, they include childcare, which has really emerged as a big issue in the last year or so, the backlog on licensing, and then broadband and transportation. So that's kind of a long list, but from those issues, when you hear from lawmakers and the discussions in Madison, what are you hearing about some of those issues, and what should we be watching for as we talk about them when we're in Madison?
I think all of those issues, Scott, are components of a healthy economy. And I think Republicans and Democrats both understand that. They know that we need more and better answers on workforce housing. They know childcare is a real issue for a lot of families. They also know that, the tax climate is part of that, and talent, not only recruiting, but retention is a very big deal, right? Who are the people that want to live in the Chippewa Valley? They may not have grown up in Florida. They may not have grown up in South Carolina, but there are plenty of reasons to want to live in the Chippewa Valley or Superior, where I'm from. We just have to sell it the right way. And so I think you're going to see a broad agreement on those four issues. Broadband, I mean, we've spent more in the last 4 years on broadband than at any time in history, and that's probably a really good thing. And there's more to come. Both the CARES money and the ARPA money, and now state monies. I think we're well over $1 billion in investment in broadband. Maybe it's $2 billion just in the last 3-4 years. So I think you'll see that continue. And I think that's an area broadly where Republicans and Democrats do agree that those four components are critical to a healthy economic development environment.
So this issue is Bill's spot on, but I will say this is where the governor's using the bully pulpit, and this is where the reality will probably hit of the split legislature. Governor came out hot in a good way, and the definition of hot, not upset, but fast, on family paid leave. That's a big deal. And that is something that he believes is really important for families and worker training and all these kind of things. So those are a big issue, big headline. He spent last week 2 days of that travel in the state talking about that. Will that get pulled out of the budget? I'm probably pretty sure that it will by the Republicans. But get past that, you get to what Bill said. You now have people that are agreeing, whether they're from Chippewa Falls, rural Chippewa Falls, or they're from Glendale or Greendale or whatever dale around Milwaukee, that we need to do childcare. We need to do workforce training. We all need broadband, whether you're in the central city of Milwaukee or you're in a farm in the middle of Trumbull County. You need more broadband. Those issues are something that I think they'll get tackled in the end and can cut through this urban and rural divide. Even greater than the partisan divide are these core issues. And that's what's really exciting about this budget is it's obviously the politics. There's a lot of politics in Wisconsin because we've been in the news for the last 12 years, it seems. But you get back down to it, it seems like Wisconsin people are pretty smart and kind of know what's important to them. And these are the issues that I think where we're at. I think at the end of the day, governor knows that, and I think the Republican legislature knows that. And I think we'll get there. And hopefully, I'm not saying I'm booking a 4th of July trip yet, Scott, but I think that we'll get to a point of where a budget should get passed by middle of summer.
Well, I think we're about ready to wrap up, but I might ask each of you if you have some closing words of wisdom for us that you want us to leave with as we think about going to Madison in a few weeks now.
I would just say thank you to all of you for participating in this. Your voice matters. You have had a massive impact in Madison over the last decade, starting with the Pablo Center, then phase 1 funding of Science Hall, other very important issues for the Chippewa Valley. And a lot of that success is a result of the work that you guys have put in. Now, I'm going to credit the chamber directly. The chamber does even more work behind the scenes along with the campus. There are multiple cadence calls that go on for months and months and months prior to these events to make sure we're all hitting on the right cylinders. And so I would just say thank you for doing what you're doing. It matters and you can make a difference.
I would echo that by saying thank you for caring about your community. It's easy to be cynical, but I will tell you, Bill and I hear this stuff every day from lawmakers. I want to hear from real people from my district. Well, you're real people from the Chippewa Valley districts, and that is helpful that you are taking time to do that. Care about your community, care about your state. Also know that you are leaders in your community and people look to you to see what is happening in our communities. And again, thank you to Scott and the Menominee Chamber, the Chippewa Chamber, and other folks that are putting this together. I feel for you with the 14 inches. I don't know how much we're going to get down here. Maybe it'll turn into be a bust, but the logistics and stuff that you're doing, Scott, and your team is forever appreciative, and I'm honored to be on the field working on behalf of the Chippewa Valley and the state capitol. Thanks for including me today.
All right. Well,
Last thing, get to the grocery store tonight. You're going to need it. Snowmageddon's coming.
And a liquor store, but anyway.
Yeah, we appreciate your taking time to be with us. This is one of those things 2 years ago when we had to do a virtual event. We found out that doing some pre-event briefings like this and taking advantage of Zoom was something that really worked and helped people be prepared. The one thing that's hard to do, though, if we were in person, I would ask everyone to give you a round of applause for taking time with us. So we'll just do a virtual applause, and thanks for being with us. All right. See, Melissa has her. Oh, several of them are. We can do it. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks
Nice.
again. And
Thanks, guys. Be safe.
Everybody be safe. We'll see you soon.